to say, if people have questions, just put them in the chat and I'll monitor the chat for you, Dr. Rick.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right. So we're going to be talking about the science of math. And so I don't know if you're familiar with the recent past 2-3 years talking about the science of reading, right? And the importance of the science of reading for all students, especially those who struggle to learn to read. And there's a group of us over the past year, I guess it was last December, that have worked to think about what is the science of math. And how can we make sure that all of our students are having an equitable opportunities to learn mathematics? And so I was very, very grateful to join this group and to be invited and to advocate for our learners with autism and intellectual disability. So I like to begin a lot of my presentations and talks with a question that I am often asked, and that is, why math? And why math for students with autism and intellectual disability? And my answer is, why do we teach math to anybody? And so why is that answer not the same for individuals with autism or intellectual disability? Are those same goals, do they not hold true for all individuals, for all of our children? And math skills can help individuals with autism and intellectual disability have enviable lives. So I borrow that term from Ann Turnbull, what she explains as a life that we would want for ourselves, that we would want for our children. And it doesn't have anything to do with physical material things, but rather about dignity and self-determination and fulfillment and an equitable and equal opportunity to lead the life that you want to lead, right? And math and academic skills can help us to achieve that. So if we think about, I have worked with individuals who are really enjoy being around animals and may have a goal of working with animals as maybe a vet tech or something like that. Well, that requires some math skills, some judgment, some reasoning of how do you, weigh animals and understanding, what unit of measurement to use. How do you take a temperature? What is a normal temperature reading? What's an abnormal temperature reading? Measuring food amounts. We have other individuals who maybe their leisure skills are gardening and they live in an urban environment, so they need an urban vertical garden. Or if it comes to personal finance and budgeting. So being a savvy consumer with those in-app purchases where sometimes they can get 10 coins for $1 or 100 coins for $5. Well, which one's a better deal? Right. So there are many ways that mathematics can help students have an enviable life or help them to live the life that they want to live. And so that might lead us to thinking about what are the instructional opportunities that we're providing to these individuals. So can they have a narrow focus of instruction, but still full access and full opportunities in their adult life? And I would argue probably not, given what we know about the learning histories and learning needs of these individuals and the intense and intentional instruction that they need in order to succeed. So I don't often read large blocks of text. It's generally discouraged. But this is one that I do like to read the words of, and it's the equity principle from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, which is one of the large professional organizations. And this is their equity principle that says, all students, regardless of their personal characteristics, backgrounds, or physical challenges, must have opportunities to study and support to learn mathematics. This does not mean that every student should be treated the same, but all students need access each year they're in school to a coherent, challenging mathematics curriculum that's taught by competent and well-supported mathematics teachers. I would probably delete mathematics and just say teachers, but they didn't ask me. So too many students, especially students who are poor, not native speakers of English, disabled, female, or members of minority groups, are victims of low expectations in mathematics. And that's what I feel like has happened to our students, that they've really just been victims of low expectations. And I want us to raise those, because from my research and my experiences, the ceiling that we place on students is artificial. And it's really just an artifact of our comfort and where science is, not where their abilities are. So I then want to go back to the so what? What are we trying to achieve? What's our goal in math instruction? If the sort of end goal is this enviable life that individuals are able to have the adult lives that they want, how can our math instruction help to achieve that? And truly, it's problem solving. Problem solving is the ultimate goal of mathematics. It's being able to generalize learning to authentic contexts. It's going to result in increased independence and opportunities and quality of life. And I would argue that problem solving is a functional skill. I strongly dislike that term. Because I say that anything that we teach that is useful should be functional, and therefore everything is a functional skill, and especially math. Math problem solving requires that you analyze a situation, that you recognize you're even in a situation, you need a solution. You're able to choose a strategy, monitor your progress. Is this strategy working for me? Do I need to make an adjustment and make changes? Right. So I'll give an example. I was able to go to Arlington, Texas a few weeks ago, and stayed in a hotel and got off the elevator. And, my room was like 304, maybe. Get off the elevator, go to the right. And I noticed that the room numbers were increasing. Right. And so it was going, 320, 322, 324. That's problem solving. That's me realizing my room number is 304 and these numbers are increasing. I'm not going to be able to get to my room. So even that is a simple example of how mathematical reasoning and problem solving and judgment, I got to turn around and go the other way. And I thought, surely the other way is not the way to my room. But yes, it was. I was just all the way down on the other end of the hall. So how do we make math meaningful? How can we make all math functional beyond this thought of just money and time? We teach it in a contextualized way. We teach our math, we teach the big ideas within the standards in a meaningful and personally relevant context. And then that's how we choose what we teach. But then how we teach it, we rely on the science of math. We rely on the research on how students learn and well-researched instructional strategies, which it is a booming area for students with autism and intellectual disability. So there are so many more strategies that we know are effective now than we knew 15 years ago. So I want to present, if a contextualized approach is new to you, I want to contrast it with a functional academics approach. So a more traditional functional academics approach is focused on teaching the skills necessary to complete a task. So we might do an ecological inventory. We assess, what are the goals for the student, and they want to work at the cash register in their parents' store when they leave school. And so we're going to think about what skills are they going to need to do that. Now, that process is important. Ecological inventories and thinking about personal relevance, that is, I'm not saying we disregard that. But in this functional approach, the planning begins with the task or skill, and then we see what we sort of back map what skills might need to be taught alongside that. In the contextualized approach, the focus for your academic instruction, so not saying you might need to do other things as well, but for your academic instructional planning, the focus is on developing academic concepts within a real life activity or natural routine. So the planning begins with with the academic standard or academic skill. So if I think, my seventh graders are working on ratios and proportions, and a percent of change is a type of that problem, I would now need to think, okay, if the concept of percent and the concept of a percent of change is important, now, okay, there's my academic standard. How can I make this personally relevant and meaningful? What context can I teach this within? And that doesn't necessarily mean community-based instruction. Everything doesn't have to be out in the community, but what's the meaningful context I can put this within to show them why this matters? And one the example of that would be leaving a tip or calculating an item on sale. So in the United States, at least, we commonly leave a 20% gratuity for servers in a restaurant. And so teaching them that if your bill is $20 and then you want to leave a 20% tip, you would calculate 20% of $20 and add that to your total bill. And we teach them to use a calculator to do that. And so we're addressing that academic standard as well as within a meaningful way that they would actually be using it. So that's what I mean by the contextualized approach, where we're teaching the big ideas, the meaningful ideas within math that are, the sort of pivotal skills. And then the way that we teach it, though, which is what I'm going to focus most of our time on tonight or this afternoon for you, is relying on the research on how students learn or how people learn, and choosing the instructional strategies that align with their phase of learning. So these are the phases of learning, also can be called the instructional hierarchy, meaning that students or all people, no matter what we're learning, go through these phases, right? That when you're first learning something, you're in acquisition, which then goes into, you move into fluency, you're able to do it with more ease. Then moving into maintenance, so over time without having to be retaught, and generalization, you're able to do it in new contexts. So this is whether I'm learning my doctoral students learning to write an academic paper, my daughter learning to walk, or learning to solve a math problem. We all you go through the same learning stages. So acquisition is where that starts, right? So it's that most basic stage of learning a new skill or concept. And what does that look like? When we are learning something brand new, we're going to make a lot of mistakes. We need a high level of support, right? So if you're teaching a child to ride a bike, you are right there with them, cheering them on, lots of positive praise and reinforcement. And, we're picking an ideal time to work on that, as much as possible. We're in a bright, sunny, well, I know you can't control the weather in Vancouver, but it's a good time. We're not on a busy street, right? And we're right there providing that support. Well, similarly, acquisition goals or acquisition instruction in math or academics or any other area is going to need to have that same level of high support, and the assumption that individuals are going to make mistakes and that we need to reinforce attempts and any approximations. So what do instructional goals look like, right? So it's not just that we're aligning our instructional strategies to the phases of learning, but also that we are aligning our goals to the phases of learning. So an acquisition goal might look like something like this. Given 10 or more objects, the student will make sets of 2 to 5 objects with verbal prompting on 6 out of 10 attempts. So what you see here is that you have the condition. So I've given 10 or more objects, which just as a side note, anytime you're making sets, you need to make sure that they have more than enough, or else they're just like transferring, right? So you wouldn't have a pile of 5 and then ask them to make a set of 5. So they're going to make sets of 2 to 5 objects. And we're going to have support, verbal prompting, and we're just looking for like 60% accuracy. That doesn't mean that when we've checked that, we can say, oh, they've mastered it, we're done. No, that just means we're going to maybe change our instructional strategies. We're going to move into a fluency goal because we want to avoid prompt dependency. So instruction in that acquisition phase is going to be explicit. We're going to isolate, simplify, and repeat the skill. We may be using visual supports or stimulus prompts, response prompting strategies. So you have here a picture of things like touch math. With the touch points might be an effective strategy. It's effective for some students. It's not for others, depending on their level of early numeracy. And then we need to pair that with high levels of reinforcement. So we need to reinforce attempts, the skill performance. We need to have immediate and highly reinforcing feedback. especially if math is an area that the student has not experienced a lot of success. And then we can use data from preference assessments to ensure that whatever we're doing is actually motivating for that student. So what I'm showing you here is a table from a article that I'm going to have linked at the very end. I'll have a URL where you can get this article. It's just came out online this week, so that was good timing. In Teaching Exceptional Children. So this is an article that I authored with Bree Jimenez, Jordan Schur, and Emily Bauk on the 4 stages of learning. And so we took the some of these evidence-based practices and we aligned them with phases of learning, so that if it has a green, then that indicates like green is go. We want to, that's an appropriate strategy to use in this phase of learning. If it's yellow, that indicates like maybe like use with caution, it might be appropriate. And red means, yeah, really not appropriate for acquisition. For example, support fading, not really appropriate for acquisition. Why would you take a support away when you're just starting to learn? Whereas time delay, very, very appropriate. And then I'm going to have a couple examples of what this might look like in math from some research studies. So this example here is showing, you can see we have task analysis, the modeling, system of least prompts were used in visual supports. So this is from a study where we taught young adults with autism and intellectual disability to solve these multiplicative comparison word problems using modified schema-based instruction. And what that is they were taught to follow the steps of this task analysis to solve these word problems and use this schematic diagram. You can see that it has the icons to listen. We used the Go Worksheet app so that they could have some independence there. I've found over and over that individuals will fade their own supports so much faster than you would fade it, right? So even we want to increase independence as much as possible. So we're having them use that for their read alouds. And then the system of least prompts was used for each step. So if the student did not independently initiate it or did not complete it independently, then system of least prompts was used. And you'll notice here a 2-column checklist. So for each step as it was completed, they didn't just check off if it was completed independently or if it was just completed, but did they complete it by themselves, as in no prompts, or did they need help? So they were almost taking their own data there, which can hold on to that for a few minutes. We also have some other aspects to visual supports, color coding, picture supports, and things like that. And again, this is a published article in the Journal of Special Education. Here's another example of very similar things, a task analysis, but it might look a little bit different of how we can use these to support students to solve problems. So again, this is word problem solving. These were students who did not have an intellectual disability, but did have autism. And you can see the use of color coding, visual supports, that task analysis of breaking down the steps of solving a problem, like underline the question. Are there any words I don't understand? What are my units? Okay, because this was with proportions. And then the color coding of the units to help support the student in staying organized. I myself struggle with these problems a lot. And so I found this helpful. Choosing a strategy and providing response options for those strategies as a feature of UDL. How did the student, which strategy did they feel most comfortable with using? And then explaining their answer here. And then here's just another task analysis example for solving word problems with manipulatives. And you can see here, one was a little bit more simple, broken down into a lot more steps, right? Some students are going to need that broken down even further. It's that great exam question that I've given on my systematic instruction exams. It's how many steps is a task analysis? And I love being able to see when students get to that question because they sit there and but it's a trick question. The answer is it depends, right? And And so here's an example that we call a student-friendly task analysis, where it's the student is
就
using
这个芭蕉树，
as
它之所以还没有熟，
considerate
是因为今
text
年太阳很热
along
了。
with the picture supports. All right, here's an example of using visual supports and constant time delay. And this is from the early skills builder curriculum. Early numeracy skills builder curriculum. And they're using time delay to teach students how to find dates on a calendar and how to move forward through dates on a calendar. Okay, so again, we have the visual supports of using, putting a marker on the first date. So like finding February 3rd, and then they're having to go 6 days later. And using calendars and counting on calendars is actually a pretty complex skill, because you have to be able to count with one-to-one correspondence and then loop back around to the second, into the next row. And then you're also using, you're not saying 1, 2, 3, you're saying December 1st, 2nd, 3rd. So it's a whole other language and vocabulary used. Okay, so once students have met the acquisition goal that you've set and you've got these great supports in place, we don't stop there. And if you notice, I set that 60% accuracy goal for acquisition. And the reason behind that was because that is how we know that the student is ready to move into fluency. And fluency is when the learner can begin to use the skill with greater ease and efficiency. That is when learning begins, not is useful, but begins to become useful, because it reduces some of that cognitive load. But we always want to make sure we're not building speed at the expense of accuracy, right? So sometimes when we think of fluency, it's very easy to think of like time tests in reading, words read per minute, or think that it's only, math facts done quickly, which that's definitely an aspect of fluency, but it's also just looking at the ease and efficiency with which you're able to complete a task. So you're no longer needing someone right there with you as you're riding the bike, but you're able to ride the bike with comfort. So what do instructional goals look like? So if we look here to see, we had our acquisition goal, and then look at how it's changed as we move into fluency. So now, given 10 or more objects, the student will make sets of 2 to 5 objects independently within 1 minute on 8 out of 10 attempts. So now the student is, we've taken away the verbal prompt, so that now they're independent. It's within 1 minute. So we've had a time-bound aspect to it, and it's on 8 out of 10 attempts, right? So we've upped the ante on the accuracy. So we're now at about 80%. So what instructional strategies support fluency? We want to provide opportunities to practice. Students just need that repeated opportunity, and we want to build motivation for independence. Students have to want to become fluent at some aspect, right? So there has to be some motivation to do things independently. So we can do that by teaching self-management and self-monitoring. And so goal setting and self-graphing are really, really powerful strategies to increase motivation and to build self-determination in a way that's age appropriate, from, early elementary, young children, all the way up through young adults. And adults, I use a lot of goal setting and self-graphing myself. And at the same time, our reinforcement has to change, right? So as our independence increases, the reinforcement has to be thinned. They need to start to move to an intermittent or variable schedule of reinforcement with contingent reinforcement after the specific desired behavior. So no longer is it like, awesome, great job every single time, but it's for meeting that specific level of criteria. So expanding on, you can see here that some of the strategies that we said were green for acquisition are now sort of yellow in fluency, right? So not saying that we stop using them necessarily, but maybe the student starts to fade them, you start to fade them, or they no longer need them anymore. The one that has changed is time delay. So time delay, likely if a student is still needing that, that level of intense instruction, they probably aren't at fluency right now. And then we have some new strategies that have become appropriate, like support fading, right? Or self-monitoring and thinning the schedule of reinforcement. So here's an example. So this is from one of the research studies where we taught percent of change within how to find your total cost when you leave a gratuity or a tip, and when you have a coupon. So if you have a 20% off coupon for your an outfit or something. And so some self-monitoring that we had, we wanted to make sure the student knew how many problems they would be solving for that day. I hold firm that everyone wants to know when they're going to be done. Whether you are in a faculty meeting, in a college class, whether or you're a middle school student doing math problems, everyone wants to know when they're going to be done. And so this is letting her know, especially since some sessions we solved 2, sometimes it was 4. So letting her know how many problems and then what she was working for. She really enjoyed playing music and dancing. And so we had these YouTube icons because she could choose what music she listened to. We also incorporated, in addition to that, goal setting and self-graphing. And so it's very simple addition to the lesson. So at the end of the lesson, so she finished, we just said, what type of problem did you solve? Making sure that she was able to articulate percent of change. And we said, well, what was your goal today? Which she knew because she had said it previously. And then we would say, well, you were able to get, X steps correct. Let's graph your progress. And we used, in this case, Excel on the iPad. You can also use Google Sheets, because once you set up that scatter plot, the student just has to type in their number. And they love doing that with the date. And then after a couple of days, we had the student wanted to choose their own emoji to reflect how they felt about their progress, which I thought was really cool. Apparently this purple icon, they felt good. That's a good sign. Here's another example for fluency. And so in this case, the student, not only was the goal completing the problems, but also in a timely manner. So we had a time-bound goal. And so in addition, we were measuring how many steps of the word problem they were able to get independently correct, as well as were they able to get the correct answer. And so, because some of the steps were showing their work, and in my experience, some individuals with autism really don't like to show their work. They like to do things in their head, which, if they have that capability, many teachers or parents don't interfere. But there becomes a time where you really have to write things down and you have to show your work. And if you make an error, it's hard for us to know where that error was so that we can help support it. So some of the steps in this case on that task analysis, they were to write things out. And so they couldn't get all their steps correct if they didn't write things down. So that's why we have both of those aspects. And then you'll notice that once we started to get our acquisition goal, we started timing and adding a time bound and seeing what their next goal was going to be. And in this case, the graphing, they got to choose the icon they used to graph, because we were just graphing on paper with stickers. So he just had a sticker that he could put on graph paper at that specific data point. Okay, so then we're fluent, but that's not enough. We need to maintain. Right? So maintenance is that ability to perform a response over time without reteaching. And it is the bridge to generalization. So students who have achieved maintenance show signs of habit and self-initiation, independence, accuracy, and consistency over time. So I have this photo. It's a beautiful picture of Hawaii. That is not a photo of me. And to remind that when it comes to riding a bike, I had not done that in a very long time. And then my husband and I went to Hawaii, and our Airbnb had bikes, and I was like, oh, this will be so fun. Let's go do this. And, that old phrase, it's like riding a bike. I was able to get right on, and I maintained that skill. It was no big deal. I think my husband was a little surprised by it, but it was no big deal. I was fine. And so that's maintenance, being able to just do it over time without needing like a lesson again or falling off. That would have been bad. It was the first day of the trip. So what do instructional goals look like in the maintenance phase? So if we take the same example across, we now have given 10 or more objects, the student will make sets of 2 to 5 objects independently within 1 minute on 9 out of 10 attempts on biweekly probes, right? So we want to periodically assess for maintenance to see if that's occurring. And so we're keeping the same sort of time-bound component, and we just want to see if it's happening over time. So how do we support maintenance? Well, our instruction can do that. We can make sure that we're continuing to thin reinforcement, and we're shifting from contrived to natural reinforcement. We want to fade direct supports. So moving from using concrete manipulatives to solving single-digit problems using drawings to maybe just doing it with no manipulatives, right? So an example of this is the concrete representational abstract, or VRA, virtual manipulative framework. Overlearning is another great strategy that I think is used more in behavior or teaching pro-social behavior, but also is effective in academics. And if anyone here has done any type of athletics or music, I remember I played piano growing up, and my grandmother was, really, really believed in not looking at your music during your recital. And so if I could play a song, she would say, well, play it 8 more times. And so that was overlearning. And so similarly, you can use that in math to help ensure maintenance. And then distributed trials, right? So making sure that they're still getting a couple opportunities to practice the skill, maybe through our warm-ups, or if you have homework, I think that that's the appropriate use of homework is maintenance, not practicing skills still in acquisition, but that's my soapbox. When it comes to fading direct supports, we can do that in 2 ways. One, we increase independence by decreasing the reliance on teachers and on paraeducators, right? So we have some sort of mechanism for the individual to be more independent. However, sometimes the format of instruction that we have can make this feel unnatural, or the way that classrooms are set up, or the way that staff responsibilities are allocated can hinder this. And I don't know if this is common where you all are, but I know that where I am, often we'll have paraeducators or teacher assistants that are consider themselves like a one-on-one for a student, or a student-specific support person. And so then they feel like it is their job to be there assisting that student. And then if the student is independent, they feel like, well, I'm not doing anything, right? Well, that's actually going to hinder maintenance and hinder that student becoming more independent. And so we need to reconsider what maybe our instructional arrangements are, or how we're utilizing staff in the classroom to make sure that we're giving students the opportunity to be independent. So going back to our chart, we now see that things like modeling, we probably shouldn't still need to model if a student's really demonstrating maintenance. Again, time delay or mass trials, probably not. Sometimes students might need a little boost or a reminder, but not consistently. This is a time where it becomes appropriate also to use simulations, right? So to see if they can maintain the skill, we can use simulations. And again, we're thinning the schedule of reinforcement. So here I have an example of overlearning. So when we had the student, when he met his goal, we had him do it 3 more days. So just 3 more days of making sure that he got that skill to see if then he would maintain. And some of Emily Bauch's research has really shown that this is effective, that overlearning is effective in making sure that there's maintenance of skills. And finally, we have generalization. And so this is the most important phase, and it's the primary purpose of learning, right? We can't teach students every single variation of a math concept they may see, or every stimulus they may have and they may encounter, but we can train for generalization. So it's that application of a skill in different settings consistently and independently. So there's a few different types of generalization that we aim for. So one is that stimulus generalization, right? So that when they have the discriminative stimulus, it's the green light, the go, that they're going to use the behavior that we've taught, and it's going to be reinforced, and that they don't respond to the stimulus delta, and they're able to discriminate between the two. So here's an example of that in math from that percent of change research study I've referenced a few times. So we taught students to calculate the percent of change when they had a coupon for a percent off, right? It was percent of change. So if they had this, I think this is like 1-800-Flowers coupon that had 20% off, they would learn how to, find what's 20% of the cost of my flowers, subtract that, because when you use a coupon, your price decreases, and that's your final cost. Those are the SDs. That's okay, here's my behavior, here's my strategy. Yes, I'm going to use this strategy in this occurrence or in this situation. However, what if they encountered like a $15 off or $5 off? Well, that's a stimulus delta, because that's not an occasion for them to use their percent of change strategy. So they needed to be able to discriminate between which stimulus would occasion the response for that strategy and get them reinforced. Okay, because if you just took 15% off of an oil change instead of $15, you probably wouldn't have saved as much money as you thought you were going to. Well, we also in math want response generalization. And the CRA framework is a great example of that. So let's say the student encountered this problem. Manny saw many animals at the beach. He saw 4 crabs. He saw double the amount of jellyfish as crabs. How many crabs did Manny see? Okay, so we could solve this using multiplication or addition. And so maybe we want to use, so in this one stimulus, there's multiple responses that could get us to reinforcement of solving the problem correctly. We could use concrete manipulatives. So we could use 2 tens frames to show our 2 groups double I realize that this does not match the quantities, but we could have our 2 groups. We could also have representations where we just draw those, or we could use our calculator, right? So multiple different responses could come with this, based on the same stimulus, could achieve our goal. When we plan for generalization, we need to remember that time changes what skills are needed or are relevant. So for example, I don't know if this is the case in Canada, but in the US, there's been a coin shortage during the pandemic. And very often there are stores that request for you not to use cash or not to use coins, or if you do, it's exact change. And I've gotten to where I very, very rarely have bills or coins with me at all. And so as I was working with some teachers on planning content for their transition class, I really just thought the whole unit on money doesn't really need to have coin and bill identification. Unless it's something that's highly valued and personally relevant and important for their families, or what that individual's future job was. Because I said, when was the last time that you went somewhere and your only choice, you had to use cash? And I really can't remember here. And so that's an example of perhaps the more efficient strategy. What students need to learn is how to use, a declining balance debit card or credit card, and how to use that. So the generalization, so that's one, we need to learn what skills are needed or relevant to target. What does that generalization look like? Because that is rapidly changing, right, with technology. And then we need to have generalization probes to assess how students are doing, to identify maybe what skills or steps are in need of more support. I'll give an example of this, that within that tip and sale study, we were doing some generalization probes out in the community. And one time the receipt was inaccurate. So there were charges on the receipt that weren't correct. The individual still left a tip. And I thought, we need to back up, because there's some other skills that we might need of how do you look at your receipt and see if it's accurate or not? And what do you do when something's not accurate, right? So there's more to it, more complexity to actually applying math skills in the real world. There's a combination of social skills that need to happen beyond just the math. So what do instructional goals look like in the generalization phase? So in this case, again, the point of teaching this skill not only is you are using manipulatives and making sets a pivotal skill for mathematics, because you're going to use that to then access higher level mathematics, but also you have to give amounts of things to people, right? So an accurate generalization goal might be that given 10 or more classroom supplies, the student will gather supplies for 2 to 5 classmates within 1 minute. Right? So maybe we've gathered at our small group and we're going to work on a project and everyone needs a pair of scissors. And I said, hey, Karen, can you go get everyone a pair of scissors? And so in that case, you would need to count how many is everyone and get them. Or Karen, can you go get 5 pairs of scissors? And can she go and get those out of the bin? Right? That would be the demonstration of a generalization of this critical skill. So you'll see from this figure that in generalization, we have some arrows going back into the other phases, because depending on how different the generalization setting is from the setting in which you originally taught it, or again, like maybe there's some other skills, social skills, or other things that might need to happen, physical, motor skills, something else, you may have to bring back some of these other strategies. So we may need to review a time delay something, or we may need to get a new task analysis, to revise the task analysis, or something like that. So to sum up, we have this goal of making math meaningful for students, so that it's something that is going to influence and enhance their life. And so when I talk about my research agenda, I say that my goal is to teach meaningful academic skills that we teach in a way that improves and enhance their life outcomes. We do that through a contextualized approach, teaching the big ideas in a personally relevant context, and then using well-researched strategies and what we know about how people learn. So here's the established evidence-based practices for teaching math to students with autism and intellectual disability. This is based on an evidence-based practice review that I did with colleagues a few years ago. What is not evidence-based? I have to throw this into, I feel like this is one of my personal missions, is to talk about how we should not use learning styles and we should not teach keywords. And so keywords are when students are taught things like, oh, if you see in all in a problem, you should add, or if you see takeaway, you subtract, right? Well, what that actually is just faulty stimulus control. It's teaching students to hunt and peck and just associate a certain word with an operation. And it doesn't really work. So Sarah Powell and colleagues have this article in Press where they analyzed word problems, and they found in single step problems with one keyword, so with the most simple problems, it only works 63% of the time. And in single step word problems that might have 2 or more keywords, it only works 29% of the time. And in multiple step problems, it works less than 10% of the time. So why would we waste our instructional time, which Bill Heward tells us is a precious commodity? Why would we waste that on a faulty strategy that might sound good, like it makes sense, but it really doesn't. What we should focus on is teaching students to really understand and apply the math. So in the word problems, to really understand what happened when her sister took away a doll. Um, how many dolls, if her sister took away and now she only has 3, she had 4 to start with, right? So that they're able to actually model that. So I want to leave you with some resources if you're interested in learning more. And so Emily Bao, Bree Jimenez, and I edited this book on mathematics for students with autism and intellectual disability. It's written to be practitioner friendly or to use in undergraduate or pre-service teacher preparation courses. And you can get it as an ebook from the DADD website, or a hard copy is available from Amazon. And they're just a conflict of interest, being transparent. I don't receive any royalties from this. All of the proceeds go back to the division, which is a nonprofit. And then this is the new article that just came out that a lot of this was based on. And so if you don't subscribe to Teaching Exceptional Children, or you are not don't have a university access, then if you will just email this email, then we would be happy to send you a copy. And finally, I have mentioned the Science of Math group. And so if you go to thescienceofmath.com, we are continually adding and building resources there for everyone, for practitioners, for researchers, for students. There's a pretty active Facebook group if you're on Facebook, where folks interact and post questions and resources, and then also a pretty active Twitter page if you're on Twitter. So that's another resource that you can stay tuned into developments there, not just for students with disabilities, but I am always advocating and making sure that our students are being represented and included as well. So here's my contact information. I want to make sure that if I can be of help or assistance to anyone, or if you try out something and you just want to share how great it's going, those are some of my favorite messages to receive. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll leave that on the screen for just a second, then we will stop sharing the screen and open it up to questions. Mm-hmm. I'll just take a look on chat, let everybody know that, I should start my video, sorry. Let everybody know that if you have some questions, we can either put up our hands right now, or we can put things in the chat. So let's close up the screen and let's see everybody. So thank you. It is, I mean, having things be functional in context is just so important for learning, and so thank you for that. So I'll open it up to the group. Are there any questions for Dr. Root right now? Sometimes it takes a sec. You can just take yourself off mute. Dr. Miranda.
Hi. Thanks, Jenny, for that great presentation. That was really interesting. And I think you're right that math is often really neglected for this population. So this is important. I'm interested in hearing you talk about how you navigate these issues of contextual relevance in general education classrooms. In BC, most kids with autism are in age-appropriate general ed classrooms. And so as they get older and further behind, you know, what can happen is that in order for it to be contextually relevant for this student, basically everybody else is doing something different, and he's sitting in the back of the room with an educational assistant doing important but different work and isn't really included with the rest of the class anymore. I mean, we see that all the time, and you've had way more experience with this in terms of the math curriculum than I think probably any of us on this Zoom call. So I'm interested in hearing you talk about how you navigate that issue.
Yeah, I think it is definitely the most difficult in math. Personally, I think it's easier when I consult or do technical assistance. It is a lot easier in literacy and science and in civics to get us all closer to the same place. But I don't see the benefit of having an island in the back. So, so what I would just, unless we're just trying to make ourselves feel good, check a box. So, what I would want to see is, what are the skills that are being targeted, and what are the specific goals for that student within that. So let me give an example of often the high school teachers give me is, linear equations. How is a linear equation relevant for my student? And I would say, well, do you ever budget? Do you ever save money for something? If you are really, if you love to see live music, when it's safe to do that again, be nice. And we can, your concert ticket costs $80 and you work at an after school job, you make $12 an hour, but your mom is going to give you $20 towards it. Well, that's a linear equation. That's 20 plus, however much I said, 12x equals 80. Right. And so it's how can we think really hard about which part of the standard, which part of the lesson, which thing that they're doing, can we make personally relevant? How can we task analyze it down and think about what's the essential understanding that we want this student to get, or really all students, and how can we make it personally relevant? And when, so my work with this and my technical assistance with this is new. It's the past 3 years. And it's when you sort of frame it this way, I've had gen ed teachers change the way that they're teaching this to their other students. So it's not just thinking about, well, how does Pat need to learn? And what does Karen need to know? It's, oh, how is this going to be relevant for everybody? Now, certainly if we're working on linear equations, our typically developing students may learn, all three forms. And the student I'm working with may only learn slope intercept form, right? But he's still getting that concept of a linear equation. And he's still doing it within a meaningful context. It might not be just his, but we thought, what's everybody in my classroom's interests? And how can I put this into a meaningful context? So contextualized instruction isn't just for students with disabilities. It's, if you come from a universal design perspective, it's for everybody.
Great, thank you. That was a really helpful example. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. There's a question from Angie in the chat. She asks, most teachers see instruction for students with autism, intellectual disability, and assume these strategies are only for those students, when in reality, it's good instruction for all students. How do practitioners convince others that this is not the case?
It is really, really hard to convince people of things when they don't think there's a problem. And it's really hard to change teacher behavior. So I don't have a very good answer for that, because it's hard to change teacher behavior, as because they just see that as like, they're the ones that need to be fixed. And what I'm doing is fine for everyone. And so that's where I come back to my answer from before of when you come from a universal design perspective of, let me think about everybody who's in my classroom. So I like to use a dinner party analogy of who is everybody that's coming to dinner tonight. And am I making sure that what I'm making is meeting everybody's needs versus, oh, I just really love to make pasta with meat sauce. Actually, it's my husband's making that at home right now, making meatballs with pasta. He puts it under the oven with the broiler. It's delicious with cheese. And then what if like, oh, well, Karen can't have cheese. So I guess she'll just have to scrape it off, or Tatiana can't have gluten. So I hope she brings her own, or I guess she'll just have the meatballs. That's the typical approach. Is like, well, what are we going to do for those students? Versus if we think about, well, who's everybody in our class? And maybe some of these strategies would benefit everyone. But I think it's a paradigm shift that has to happen.
Great, thank you. We'll take one more question from Tatiana. Thank you. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. I have a question. I'm working as a learning support teacher in elementary school. And at my school, a lot of reading instruction is focused on balanced literacy. And I have a question regarding, would you suggest, I'm all pro universal design. I've taken the course at UBC with Jennifer. I agree with everything. However, we have sometimes students who are in grade 6 or 7, and they have not been exposed to, I would say, structured literacy or enough reading instruction to be able to read not at grade 6, 7, or but not even close to their grade level, like they are 3, 4, 5 grades behind. Would you suggest, and we do we're trying to, exactly what you said with the math, with the linear equation, we're trying to do all of that for literacy, but would you still suggest that sometimes twice a week they would need to be pulled out of the classroom and work on that specific literacy structured strategies to teach them reading, because there is no way they can learn reading in the classroom, and the teacher literally with so many kids, they just cannot go to CVC and like phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, and that's where those kids are.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
Yes. Because then I feel like we are falling on the other side of, like, yes, we're accepting the novelty, but we forget that one or small group instruction, right? And they, regardless of what the teacher will do in class, regardless if I go in class, they cannot, and it's very, like, emotionally, it's very hard for them because they don't feel comfortable seeing that in a grade 6, 7, that everybody's working on writing essays and doing like current events, like those big articles, while they work on, identifying syllables and CVC and silent E and all those, concepts.
Yeah, I absolutely think that they need intensive instruction in those skills using evidence-based practices. So ideally you would have a curriculum to follow, because that's less work on the teachers, that's already sequenced and all of that, if you have that available, because otherwise they're not going to learn it. So those, to me, those are your two choices. They're not going to learn it by osmosis because they would have already.
I'm going to stop. Sorry, I'm just going to say